Hey everybody, my name is Justin Tibbs. I'm the Chief Security Officer at ANM. I'm here with Colt, Garrett, and Phil, and we're going to let them introduce themselves here in a second, but we're going to have a great conversation about Reach Security today. And with that, I'll start with Phil, if you want to give your introduction.
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Phil Wong, based out of Denver, Colorado, and I am our Director of Cybersecurity for ANM. My background is primarily in security operations and incident response.
Yeah. Garrett Hamilton, CEO and co-founder of Reach Security. Thanks for having us, Justin and Phil. Prior to Reach, I was responsible for a number of products at Palo Alto Networks.
And I'm Colt Blackmore. I'm the CTO at Reach Security, and my background is in threat research, data science, and core engineering.
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of start out just understanding how you guys came to like the genesis of Reach, like what drove that, and what were the ideas behind it, and then we can kind of dive into what you guys are focusing on.
Yeah, so I think there's really two ways to describe how we arrived at what we've built. I think more than anything, there's this North Star around seeing a problem in cybersecurity that just needed to be solved. And then of course there's a technical answer, a technical solution to that problem. So I'll let Colt kick it off with why he and I have been friends for 14 years, and we always talked about building companies together, why we decided to pick this problem to go and solve.
Well, I don't know that the answer is specifically technical. It's more like we spent a decade building threat detection products, and that meant that every time a product missed an attack, we would get called in to talk to those customers, right? So this happened hundreds of times over many years, and every time we went into one of these customers, we would find that maybe not the product we built, but some product that they already had, identity, network, endpoint, something was capable of preventing the attack that they were impacted by. The issue was that they weren't using it effectively enough. And so the impetus for Reach was, well, we should be able to create some kind of automation system that does that for you.
Yeah, and the idea there is it's not actually the customer's fault. And in fact, it's really not even the vendor's fault in the day. Vendors have built these incredibly technical solutions that solve real technical problems for customers. Any of the big vendors out there that you can think of that immediately jump to mind or here at this floor, they've built incredibly powerful solutions, but there's always been this gap between solving technical problems and usability. And I'm sure you see it throughout your tenure and everything you've done in your career. And so what we're arriving at more broadly in, call it the world of IT and security and beyond, is people are looking for these co-pilots, agents, things of that sort to really effectively manage products for them or manage tasks for them that maybe humans aren't the best people to actually go and figure out on their own, or best things to go figure out on their own. So that's the really impetus behind why we started Reach a few years ago. It didn't come from a market category being defined. It really came from experiences being at companies that had tens of thousands, in some cases over 100,000 customers that bought a lot of stuff, right?
Sure.
And needed to get more value out of it.
So what it sounds like to me is we're talking something along the lines of optimization, even adoption of technologies, right? I think that's something that my team has always kind of preached to our clients and working with our clients as well. You know, it's really big. It's not just about buying technologies. It's really how are you adopting these things? How are you actually using these things? My experience has primarily been working within large enterprise. And within large enterprise, there's, you have the actual budgets to buy a lot of these industry best technologies, but it doesn't mean they're all speaking together. It doesn't mean they're all optimized correctly. Is that the idea that you had around it as well?
Yeah, I think we're going down this path where we assume that buying a platform was the easy button to actually get value and rationalize value out of tools. But in some cases, these platforms have almost made things more complicated. When you had a point person owning a point product, it was very clear that product, the care and feeding, was associated with that person.
100%.
But now you have 7 people in one tool, because this tool does VM and detection and prevention and whatever it might be. And so it almost in some ways has become complicated, where it's not just the tools talking to one another from disparate vendors, but a single tool being used in a shared responsibility model, which is no different than what people are talking about in the cloud.
So along those lines, can just kind of give us some background on what you guys are doing at Reach today and kind of where you see that driving outcomes for clients.
So I'll start at the broadest level, our North Star and what we focus on, and I think it'd be great to get Colt's perspective on the technical delivery of this, because that's really what we believe, it's the fundamental shift that has to happen to fix what's typically a human challenge or a situation where people are throwing humans at it.
Right.
So our North Star as a company is to help organizations deliver the best possible security posture using the tools and capabilities they have today. That doesn't mean that there might not be gaps that couldn't be resolved, but you start at ground zero by rationalizing what's in place today, making sense of it, and then figuring out how to improve upon that, using what is sometimes referred as like a threat-informed approach, using meaningful data on your organization versus taking a vendor's word for it or some type of assessment's word for it. That might be more of a best practice or something of that sort. So that's our North Star, and how we measure that success like permeates into how we measure our success, as in we actually track how much better off customers have improved their posture with their tools based on Reach's recommendation. So that's at a high level what our goal is and what we do for each of our customers I work with, and what we have in our offering with ANM. But at a technical level, I think that's actually a really important piece of this, because you might think there's a bunch of humans or hamsters or services behind the SaaS product that's running, but that's actually fundamentally the problem. And so I'll throw it over to you to talk about what technology, Colt.
Yeah, you can't really do this just by throwing people at the problem, which is true for most interesting problems. Mm-hmm. There's a scalability challenge there. So, of course, we're doing things algorithmically. So that means plugging into sort of top to bottom the security and general data infrastructure of the companies that we serve, starting with identity, so something like Active Directory, because sort of the tip of the spear when it comes to security is people.
Right.
Of course, there are spammy threat actors that just try to attack anything that they can see, and they don't necessarily care about their targets, and preventing those attacks is important, but really, if we're putting ourselves in the attacker mindset, they don't see faceless companies, they see Mike in HR who controls payroll direct deposit and can divert paychecks so you can steal people's income, for example. Attackers have specific goals, and they have specific ways of trying to go about achieving those goals, right? So we start by taking in information about people. What is their job title? What's their department name? The management chain? All of this human context, so we can understand the particular kind of risk surface that they represent. And then we go and look at the actual attack data. So regardless of how well something like an email gateway or a firewall is being used, it still sees a whole bunch of stuff. That's a lot of data that we can pull in and operationalize, right? So if you've got a firewall forwarding attacks up to a cloud where they get sandboxed and you're generating forensic data, for example, you can break the attacks down into the 5 or 10 or 20 steps the attack would go through at a low level to achieve its goal. And then we can look at the products that are in place, and the data that we're looking at and the products that we're attempting to reach and reconfigure, they can be separate, right? So you can be looking at email data, forensics around email data, but using that data to drive changes at the network level with firewalls or on the endpoint, for example. So it's all about understanding, in the real world, what do the attacks look like, how do they work, who are they targeting, who do the attackers care about, and then going into the products that can protect people and tuning everything specifically for the kinds of threats that the company is facing.
And the tuning is based on how do I want to phrase this? I want to say it's kind of customized to that environment itself, based on the tools that client
Exactly.
has, and then what you're finding in the data.
Yeah, I mean, it can expand beyond that. Of course, it's possible to hypothesize, here's what you could do with a product you don't own today to help them figure out what they should go buy next. Okay. And you can do it in the opposite direction. You can identify products that they're paying a lot of money for and not actually getting value out of, and eliminate that spend.
Now, Colt, we talk about a lot here is the security at this point is a problem of scale.
Yeah.
You may have heard me mention around this, the technical challenge is like, okay, we built a lot of technical products to solve these technical problems, and that's really great. But inevitably, where we run into the largest challenge is how do we scale those capabilities, but more so the humans that are scaling those capabilities. And so Colt uses phrasing like we, but solving that scale problem is not, again, like people on the back end. So what's the solution to the scale problem?
Well, like I said, it's algorithmic, right? So I don't want to play buzzword bingo, but it's AI based, though not machine learning based. That distinction is important. The reason I draw it is because if you want to put those things in two broadly different categories, you could say that machine learning systems are statistical, so they're drawing inferences based on data and patterns. But you can also build reasoning systems that operate logically, so when they analyze data and make decisions, they're doing that in a very concrete way, in a very exacting way, not in a statistical way. Statistics can arrive at the same conclusions when they work out well, but they can also lead you very far astray.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating, the differentiation there between, and I think that's important because, like you said, there's buzzword bingo, especially on this floor this year. Everything is AI, AI,
Yes.
AI, LLMs, AI. It's going to save the world. And I think you had a funny quote that I love, which you said, AI is just a tool.
Yeah. Just a tool to make you happy.
Just a tool to make you happy. That's what it was. I call it a t-shirt quote.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I love that because I'm finding there's like a lot of abuse of the AI word, and you gave a talk at B-Sides about this topic potentially, right?
Can I say the name?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the talk is called Fuck Your AI Model, or Fuck Your ML Model specifically. So it was about all the other forms of AI that sometimes are quite similar to ML, but they work in fundamentally different ways and are much better at solving a lot of hard problems that ML is not particularly good at.
Well, I think we can use an example too. So there are applications of ML that have become quite useful that we've built in our past lives. So introducing a sandboxing technology helps. Certainly, there's very limited reverse engineers out there in the world, but helps those analysts and reverse engineers find the needle in the haystack. So
Right.
the ML and those capabilities, filter that out. Now, it's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay to get some of those verdicts incorrect, which we've all dealt with, that false positives. And if you build the products, you've seen them. You've probably helped them on the operational side, right? Like we've created them on our side in some cases, but that's maybe the good examples. Like statistically, you can be very close to accurate with the right amount of care and feeding and attention on labeling and things of that sort. But when it comes to having to reason and understand how to configure security tooling or rationalize how tools are actually protecting an organization, you need to have a system that can do just that, can make sense of it, and then communicate why it thinks that. And that's where statistical inferences become a challenge, and why we think, square peg round hole, that type of thing that's happening right now in the market.
Yeah.
But yeah, shout out to his talk. I hope you beep that part of his talk, because that would be fantastic. No, now I'm going to blur out his mouth.
Don't beep it.
That'd be amazing.
Well, yeah,
Blur out his mouth.
No, we're not.
Blur out my whole face.
That'd be amazing. That'd be amazing.
We're not beeping. We're going to do the witness protection black shadow. So
You know, like the voice modulator.
voice
Yeah,
modulation
right.
and everything.
Yeah.
We got you.
All of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, I was going to dive into this more so for people maybe catch this is as you guys are working through expanding the Reach platform and developing kind of the I'm going to call it the telemetry feeds that come in, and how you algorithmically, I can't talk today, give me categorization or risk clarification, all that fun stuff. How do you have kind of a high level approach on how you derive some of that risk data for a client? Let's say that I'm company A and I want to see a POC of your platform, and you say you're taking my identity data. What specifically do you correlate at a high level to be able to tell me specifically in my environment, what the high risks are?
Yeah, so it's a combination of the nature of the target.
Okay.
So I would say most security organizations know enough at least to pay special attention to executive teams.
Right.
They have a fair amount of power, or not even the teams directly, but often the executive assistants who control executive email, for example. And that generally means the CEO and the CFO in particular, right? They're going to be targeted. So you can understand the privileged role that they occupy, the things that an attacker could do with access to that. So that's going to help guide our sense of the risk there. But then also, what is the nature of the attack, right? If it's phishing, credential phishing, but it's trying to steal somebody's personal banking login or their Netflix login, how much do we care about that versus if it's their G Suite or Office 365 login, right? There's a very big delta there, and the level of risk that represents. And I mean, all malware is bad, of course, but it's a similar thing with malware. You have crypto miners, which are just going to burn some CPU cycles to get some Bitcoin, but it's not the end of the world for somebody who gets popped that way, right? Ransomware is worse, depending on how bad it penetrates into a network, can be very bad. So there are some things to think through there. But then you also have things like persistent backdoors, which are trying to maintain access over long periods of time for an attacker who might be interested in intellectual property theft, or just something that is on a longer time scale much, much worse for a company. And so we're going to rate those things higher. And we also care about how widely distributed attacks are. So is it a specific person being targeted? Is it a specific company, a number of people in the company? Or is it just every person on every marketing team, on every company that an attacker can find because they're scraping these things out of the internet?
Okay.
The level of targetedness is also important to consider for risk.
Okay. And so ingesting that data, you guys are not just accepting the truth from like a firewall, you're bringing it into kind of your own normalization
We do. We don't consider it to be our job to second guess the products we integrate with, but we have spent a decade building these products. We find lots of false positives and false negatives in the data we review, and so we do implement heuristics to try to clean up the sometimes messy vendor data.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We won't name vendors.
We won't name vendors.
How much of this information is shared between all of your clients together? I can certainly see, I come from a healthcare background, so there's a lot of even concepts of basic, incident response, incident handling, even uploading to sandboxes. Some people get kind of weary of things like that. So how much of that information, obviously it's heavily risk focused and risk based, but how much of that information is shared between all of your clients, if any?
No, it's a great question, and the answer is none of it today. It's a great question because as soon as you start talking about AI, people are legitimately worried because ChatGPT, for example, has leaked information across users, right?
Absolutely.
And when you build machine learning models, which are constructed out of lots of data from different places, you do run this risk of leaking data from one place into another place, and you have no mechanism, and you can't have a mechanism really, a reliable one, a foolproof one, you can't have it to stop that leakage from happening. There's just no way really to do that technologically.
Sure.
The way we work is we are building dedicated, unique models for every single customer, specialized on their data. And to the extent that there are interesting things going on out in the world at large, SolarWinds or whatever the next thing is, right? We can leverage some of that data to inform the recommendations that are coming out of Reach and the reprogramming that we do of the security systems. But it is driven entirely by the customer's own data.
And that's been a big, so Colt being the technical side of this and myself running the sales organization at Reach, that's been probably one of the more interesting conversations to have amongst you guys, because there's a lot of companies that you've been meeting with and seeing that say they have this model and this, and there's always been that scare around, well, is my data co-living with everybody else's?
Sure.
It's just another way to think about how their data was actually already co-living with other people's data in a non-AI world, right? but same thing, right? And so fundamentally when we built the system, we built with that privacy and that security in mind, and it just so happens that AI became this really big thing. We'll start to have those questions. But again, that somewhat comes from the experiences of building products where we had to have the opposite discussion of, don't worry, healthcare organization, it sits with other files from other healthcare organizations, but no one looks at them, right? So it kind of it takes care of that.
We're super secure, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'd actually be curious from the ANM side. I mean, we're plugged in from our world, but our world's like this in some ways. We come here and we see a lot of companies that we haven't even heard of before. And so from your side, I mean, what technologies are you seeing your teams and your customers willing to embrace, and why? It doesn't have to be a specific vendor, but like capabilities and technologies that are saying they use AI or using ML, or maybe none of them are being embraced that say they use AI and ML. Like, I'm very curious in that regard.
I mean, if we want to go on the Wayback Machine, silence, everybody bought that. It was AI.
It was ML.
I know, I was being funny. Because I knew he was going to jump in on that.
Oh yeah, somebody from Silence is on this panel. Trust us. Right. Trust us. Trust the math.
Math doesn't lie.
Yeah.
There are numbers. They add up. It's
completely true.
What could go wrong?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of wanting to jump into spaces. I mean, you have the traditional machine learning models that are out there on different things, like the deep instincts of the world who use neural networks for things, right? And that's been out for a bit. We see clients look at solutions like that, but the things that are like touting brand new AI, I haven't seen anybody rapidly. I hear a lot of talk about it, but I don't see a lot of I must have this right now, put it in. It's more so I'm super interested in what this is going to do, but I'm super scared, as you had mentioned, about what this is going to do and what is it going to do, right? And what does this look like? And I think there's this kind of reality too, especially with LLMs. We had made the joke yesterday. It's just autocorrect on steroids to some level, right? With ChatGPT or Bard or whatever. And then how do the positives of that solution outweigh the negatives of potentially what it could do if you used it in the wrong way or put the wrong data in it? And so, from my perspective, it's more so the traditional old school, and I'm going to call old school machine learning, is still relevant in the endpoint space. We see that, right? We see it on the firewalls, as you guys know. But the brand new stuff where I'm seeing AI pop up in specific ways, I haven't seen rapid adoption. I've seen a lot of discussion, but there's also this kind of fear scenario. It reminds me of when I was at Cisco and we had the FWSM, and it had automated ACL placement, where it would go place an ACL on a router, and we were super excited about the feature, but no customer would ever deploy it. They're like, there's no way I want my firewall to actually automatically go upstream to a router and put an ACL in place by itself. And that same reaction is kind of how I'm gauging the response from a lot of our clients with AI, the new AI. It seems really interesting, but I'm a little bit afraid of it. Like, what is it actually going to do? So I think there's a lot of, it kind of reminds me of, in my long-winded way, of when MDR hit the market. There's like 6,000 MDRs. What is it really? And so I think that's still a lot of our clients are waiting to figure out what is it going to be really. So.
I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing as well, right? I think the big thing, it's great you brought up MDR. I think to me, the problem, as you described earlier, of things getting more simple but more complicated at the same time, right? There's less point solutions out there technically, right? Previously, if you go before like the next-gen firewall, you used to have 5 or 6 different point solutions that now all get collapsed into a next-gen firewall. But these platforms are harder and harder to manage, right? So for a lot of clients that we're seeing today, it becomes an operationalizing problem, right? We still have a negative unemployment rate in our industry. So you still can't find the people to fill these jobs, right? So as we start to see advancements in technologies, I can't say it's another point solution that's using it. It's more features and capabilities of these solutions, right, and how they're doing it. So MDR, to me, I think is a big deal right now because a lot of people don't know how to consume the information out of this, right? Our industry seems to have an addiction to data. We want to see all the data. We want to see everything. We want to see behavioral analytics. We want to see it all. But what are you doing with that?
Yeah.
If you don't have a SOC background, you don't have SOC analysts, you don't have incident handling procedures, how are you doing that, right? What I love about what I've seen with Reach so far is one of the most important steps of incident response is the last step. What are you doing next, right? What are your lessons learned?
Right.
We responded to this incident, we contained it, we brought the business back up. How do we prevent it from happening again? So when we use a threat-based or a risk-based approach in the actual configuration of how we're operationalizing these tool sets, I think that's something fascinating to me. That's something I've never seen before, right? We're so used to being very, very reactive on a technical level, but not on preventative from a controls perspective, rather than from a configuration perspective, rather than just a technology that fixes this one problem, this one use case.
Yeah, I think you hit on something super compelling that I think you guys really take and blow apart is best practices, where it's like, hey, if you just do all these things in this 50-page document, you are good to go, everybody. And everybody looks exactly the same because we're all in Smallville, right? But that's really not the case, right? And I think you guys take that kind of best practices handbook and kind of go, that's cute, but guess what? It doesn't really apply to half of the things you're doing because I'll pick on Palo Alto, right? Because we've all played in the Palo Alto space where they had the best practice, the BPA assessment, which said if you do all these things, you should be good. But then realistically, you do all those things and you realize, no, that's really not going to protect me. That DAG isn't going to work properly, or that URL filtering is not really what I need. Or if I do this, I completely lock out this, right? And so there's no true kind of customer variable injected into that BPA or any kind of best practice. It's just kind of a black and white from a practitioner that says, do these things, which in security we do a lot of, right? Like NIST is like poof, PCI is like poof, right? And so I think there's this really cool element for you guys where you go, there is kind of this best practice thing, but really it's based on the telemetry that we're getting from your investments and your environment to say, your best practice looks like this. Your best practice looks like this. You are not alike, even though you think you might be. It reminds me of, yesterday we were talking to Christopher and team, and they use the word concierge model on how they deal with their clients. It reminds me very much of that, where it's like, hey, I'm going to tell you what to do in your environment based on your tool sets and your environment based on our algorithmic approach, which to me is something that I think that should be kind of screamed from the rooftops, because it's like, how many times have we pulled out the best practice guide for something and what is this thing? It's not relevant to my environment. And you guys have taken that and spun it around and said, okay, let's really make best practices truly catered to you to be a best practice.
Yeah, we call it, Colt loves this, but or makes fun of me rather, but I think he loves it. It's endearing. We say tweak, tune, and tailor, right?
Ooh,
so it's the idea of like basically tailoring security to you. It's almost as if you went into a tailor and had a custom dress or custom suit or something that made for you. And you start with measurement. Like, where does it start? You start with measurement. You don't want to go to the place like, here, try this code on. Like, okay, roughly this is what it's going to look like. You want to start with measurement, and that's comes down to how you use the data effectively. You know, you talk about this the last step problem. We call it at Reach the last mile problem. It's the shift from being consultative, telling you that you have gaps, telling you that you have some challenges, telling you that there's things you could turn on from best practice assessment, and then having the information and wherewithal to actually provide you the configurations as code or the content that can be staged. If you think about developer kind of infrastructure, like staging versus production, stage that to your products, and bridge that gap between here was the challenge and here's the optimization that we can use. And I think this is the rather like larger encompassing challenge here that people ignore and don't want to talk about in security, because we want to embrace automation and we want to embrace these technologies. So we'll talk about privacy challenges versus like risk to job challenges. We were just talking to a CISO right before we got here, and he says, I have 6 or 7 people dedicated, my security engineering team dedicated to making these tools hum and work. You're going to come in, and effectively, if your product does what it says it's doing, you're going to take these jobs. And I said, well, you just told us about a very big project you have to go learn how to tackle. Is it a more effective use of your resources' time to go and figure out how to solve that really challenging problem, and maybe they level up and they learn new skills and they get to like hang their hat on this really important project to the president? Or do you want to leave them continuing to do things that honestly are just kind of like it's not great work, it's not fun work, and it's not necessarily productive? Like have you asked them if they like doing that work?
Sure.
Or would they like to go work on this new important thing?
Right.
And that's, I think, the nature of, I think it's the good intention of what any AI technology is trying to do. But that's really our intention here, is solve the scale problem by requiring the current skilled worker to do something more meaningful, more important to likely the business. Like, this project is so important, it has support from the top down. But instead of going and hiring more people to go do just that, is there an opportunity to take current resources and cause them to do that? And can you fill the gap? And that's kind of where Reach comes in. But yeah, the last mile problem was our observation in building the company in the early days was, look, we produced reports. And I produced details of what could go and be done, even like the deployment guide itself.
Right.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, like, unless you can actually deploy something, it's even if you're not doing the full push an ACL to a router, like, even just to stage something to be viewed, that became really critical and a separate problem to solve, and one that I don't think any product should be accepted without being able to do the last mile for customers these days. Like, I don't think it's acceptable.
Well, we know what will happen if it doesn't do it.
Yeah, we've lived it for decades, right?
Nothing will actually get done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You probably remember the days of signatures before people trusted signatures to be auto-pushed?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? Like, there's a whole review process, and you're like a week behind,
Yeah.
and like, oh, we got to review all these signatures. And then we saw this progression at our prior employer and like helped push this, but then it went like 24 hours.
Yep.
What was it? Like an hour.
Down to an hour.
Down to an hour.
Five
It was like
30 minutes.
30 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes,
5
real
minutes,
time,
1
right?
minute
So
real
it's like
time, yeah.
you had to actually had to do it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's the fun part of it, but it's also the biggest challenge at the end of the day.
It's trust, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it comes down to. It takes time to build that trust.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. But thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we're always curious. I mean, the reach and breadth and scope of what your security program has in terms of the customer base and the differences, right? Like a SLED organization just trying to make it work with budget cuts running the school versus massive healthcare organization that owns everything and kind of everything in between.
Right.
What we've observed is the problem existed everywhere.
Yeah.
But, and there's arguments where you feel it most acutely, but the problem has kind of existed. And so you had offerings to try to solve this for customers prior as well, right?
Yeah, I think we're always trying to, I always say kind of do more with less, right? But it's, in the past we've talked about using automation to, automation AI, to even elevate SOC analysts, right? Where it's like, okay, nobody wants to be in a tier 1 analyst position forever. It's really the grind. And really this is where, ML and LLMs can become fantastic, right? Churning and burning that data. And then how do you take, instead of getting rid of those analysts, how do you take them and make them grade 2 analysts, so you have more focus on relevant threats instead of the insane noise that happens at one, right? And start building models like that. So that was really kind of early on how we started kind of thinking about these types of things. How do you not replace your people, but how do you take your amazingly skilled team and, like you said, make them happy, right? So they do amazing work, or don't go hire for your new project because you have people who can do that, and you have a platform like yours that comes in and helps push that. So.
Right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting space right now. You call out the SOC analyst. We've been talking to security leaders lately at like massive global companies, and there's this trend of doing away with the analyst model. The idea there is like hire skilled workers that are highly skilled workers, and hire some analysts entry level, but the fastest path possible to being able to respond and handle incidents.
Right.
And so everybody has to take a turn at doing that not so great work so we can find the best ways to optimize and fix it and develop and automate and whatever it might be. And now some of these groups have like literally told by vendors some of the most fantastic automation programs, different programs that are in place because they took the entry level people, brought them in with the people that are like, why is this work even being done? Like, this is horrific,
Right.
Like,
Right.
Why would you
is
do
horrific.
this?
It's like when we'd have at our previous employers, you'd have people that would end up on call, right? So you have like the engineers that handle infrastructure, and then you have the engineers that deploy the codes. Like, you're going to be on call for a week, and then they sit there like, oh my gosh,
Right.
is like we can't go on this way. And so you have these people come together and come up with solutions. I think it's directionally where it's going, and tech in multiple ways is helping that. But you're seeing that trend because like the 3 million number going to 4 or 6. First of all, it can't be real. Second of all, it's like nonsensical to solve it in traditional methods.
Yeah,
So,
kind of think differently.
Yeah.
Not to pun on Steve Jobs there, but.
yeah.
All right. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you guys for jumping in and shooting the breeze with us today. And,
Yeah.
So anything else you want to chat before we go?
San Dimas High School football rules.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly true.
All right.
Awesome.
All
No,
right.
that's it. No, thank you for the opportunity. And I think what we want people to pay attention to, if it's not with Reach, is just can we think about some of these problems differently? That's
Yeah.
why we have talks that at this B-Sides as an example that thinks about that. It's like, what's the precursor to solving these problems?
Yeah, you would get people thinking.
Yeah, because you're going to spend a lot of time down there with marketing that doesn't want you to think.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I
Like,
think that,
In fact, it depends upon your not thinking.
Yes, yeah, yes. So, and that's not necessarily the fault of any particular vendor or industry at whole.
That's
Like,
just
that's just
leadership
what
in
it
the
is.
paradigm,
It's
yeah.
just it, right? Like, we're no different than other industries, right? It's
No,
just
we're
is
not.
what it is. So, no, but thank you for the opportunity.
yeah, appreciate you guys. Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
guys.
Yep.